He set his fork down gently, smiled across the table, and asked me a question that stopped everything cold. "So, Mom, how are you enjoying the monthly money I've been sending you?" For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. But he was looking directly at me, kind, expectant, like he genuinely wanted to know. And I remember tilting my head, blinking, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. "Monthly money," I repeated slowly. "What money, Jason?" The room stiffened. The chatter died mid-sentence. A spoon dropped. Someone shifted in their chair. I heard the faint creak of my ceiling fan overhead, and even that felt loud. I looked around the table, at my grandkids, at the roasted turkey, at the homemade pies still cooling on the sideboard, and then at Melissa. She was frozen, still smiling, but her face had gone pale, her lips trembling ever so slightly. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. And that's when the knot formed in my chest. You don't need fireworks or shouting to know something is very, very wrong. Sometimes it's the silence that tells you everything. Sometimes it's the look someone refuses to give you. Jason's smile faded. I haven't been getting it?" I shook my head. And as he reached for his phone to show me the receipts, to prove that over the past 14 months, he had been transferring over $1,000 to what he thought was my account, I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, mouth dry. Everything around me blurred, like the moment right before you drop a glass and it shatters on the floor. You know what's coming. You just don't know how bad it's going to be. My hands started to tremble. And across the table Melissa finally spoke. Except she didn't say much. She just whispered. I thought she knew. And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a banking error or a tech glitch. This was something else. That Thanksgiving dinner, the one I had spent 3 days preparing, became the moment I would question everything I thought I understood about the people sitting at my table. The woman I had trusted. The son I had raised. And the quiet little things I had overlooked, because I never wanted to believe they could mean more. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered. If this is your first time coming across one of our stories, welcome. Please hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't scroll away, because what happened next no one saw coming. I've always lived a quiet life. After retiring from nursing at 62, I settled into a slow rhythm, mornings with my crossword puzzles, tending to my garden out back, and keeping the house just the way Robert, my late husband, liked it when he was alive. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same faces, same sounds of lawnmowers in the summer, and the scrape of shovels on icy driveways in the winter. I liked it that way. Predictability gave me peace. After Robert passed, people warned me about loneliness, but I never feared being alone. I feared being a burden. That's why I never asked for help. Not even from Jason, my only child. He was busy with his career, building a life with Melissa, and raising their 2 little ones. I didn't want to get in the way. Jason had always been a good boy. Thoughtful. Soft-spoken. He never liked conflict. Even as a teenager, he would walk away rather than raise his voice. I used to think it was maturity. Now I wonder if it was something else entirely. Melissa came into our lives like a breeze through an open window. Beautiful. Well put together. Always dressed in creams and pastels, like a magazine ad. She had this way of speaking that made everything sound rehearsed, but polite. Always polite. And she called me Mom from day one, which I took as a kindness. Looking back now, I can't decide if it was flattery or strategy. They were married within a year of meeting. The wedding was grand, more than what Jason could afford alone. Melissa's parents paid for most of it. She had a vision, and she made sure every guest saw it executed down to the monogram napkins. After the honeymoon, things changed slowly. Jason stopped calling as often. Melissa would answer instead, cheerful but rushed. He's swamped right now, Mom, but I'll tell him you called. Sometimes he'd call back. Sometimes he wouldn't. I convinced myself it was normal. Life gets busy. Young families need space. Then the offers began. Melissa insisted I let her help with my bills. It's no trouble, she said. We'll just streamline your utilities, get everything digital. I can manage all that for you. I hesitated. But she assured me it was safer, more convenient. She said she'd teach me how to access it all on my phone later. I smiled and nodded. But I never saw the logins. I never got the passwords. One afternoon she dropped by with her laptop and a latte. "Just sign here," she said, tilting the screen toward me. "Standard authorization stuff." I remember the form had medical headers. She said it was for my insurance. So I signed. Weeks passed. Then months. And I started noticing little things. Jason didn't ask how I was doing anymore, just whether I needed anything. And even that felt rehearsed, like he was reading off a list. The grandkids stopped visiting as much. Melissa said they were overloaded with activities. I missed them. But I never said a word. Instead, I kept myself busy. Tending to the azaleas, repainting the porch railings, rereading letters Robert had written to me when he was deployed overseas, back when love was handwritten and promises were made out loud. There were moments when I questioned my place in Jason's life, but I reminded myself that aging quietly is its own kind of dignity. The worst thing a mother can do is beg for time or attention. At least, that's what I believed. Still, there were things I couldn't ignore. Melissa once called and told me not to worry about my internet bill. She'd taken care of it, except the following week, I got a disconnection notice. She laughed when I brought it up. "Oh, that must have been a glitch. I'll fix it, don't worry." But the more I handed over, the less I understood. She offered to update my Medicare profile. She suggested setting up autopay for my prescriptions. She started picking up my mail to help sort through the junk. I told myself she was just being helpful, efficient, a modern daughter-in-law, but a quiet unease started to sit just beneath the surface. And still, I said nothing. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. I didn't want to seem paranoid. When you're a woman of a certain age, people already assume you're forgetting things. You misplace a bill, and suddenly they speak slower to you. You hesitate at a question, and they start finishing your sentences. So I kept quiet. I told myself Jason would never let anything happen to me. That he was just busy. That Melissa was just strong-willed. That family means trust. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it feels off. And then Thanksgiving came. And with it, a question that unraveled every quiet assumption I had ever made. A question that pulled the rug out from under a decade of silence. Question I will never forget. "How are you enjoying the monthly money I've been sending you?" I didn't know it then. But that moment wasn't the beginning of something. It was the unveiling of everything I'd chosen not to see. And once the veil lifted, there was no going back. Thanksgiving has always meant something different to me. Not just the food, not just the rituals, but the gathering itself. The full table, the passing of plates, the quiet clinking of forks and laughter echoing down the hallway. Robert used to say it was the only holiday where no one expected gifts, just presents. So even after he was gone, I held on to that. I made it a point to cook everything from scratch. The cranberry sauce with fresh oranges, the sweet potato casserole with that buttery pecan crust Jason loved as a boy. I even dug out the lace table runner Robert's mother had crocheted decades ago. It had a coffee stain near the edge. I placed the centerpiece right over it. A week before the holiday, I called Jason to confirm they were still coming. He answered after a few rings, voice rushed, background noise humming through the line. "Yeah, Mom, we'll be there. Melissa's wondering if you'd rather come to us this year. It might be easier." That word always carried weight, didn't it? I told him no. I was already planning, that I'd been brining the turkey since Monday, and the kids could help me decorate sugar cookies like last year. He paused for a second and said, "All right, we'll be there." But it wasn't just a suggestion. It was the way Melissa followed up the next morning with a cheerful text. "Are you sure, Mom? I know how exhausting these big meals can be. Just thinking of you. 2 hearts." I replied simply, "Looking forward to it. See you soon." That's the thing about being a widow, you learn to hold your own ground, even when it feels like the wind's picking up. The night before, I stayed up basting the turkey, ironing the napkins, and setting the place cards the grandkids had scribbled their names on with glitter pens. It wasn't just a meal. It was proof that I still mattered. That even though the world had shifted around me, I was still the center of something. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a chill in the air. I lit the cinnamon-scented candles, placed the pies by the window to cool, and changed into a soft burgundy sweater Robert once bought me on a random Tuesday. He said it brought out my eyes. When their car pulled into the driveway, I felt that familiar flutter of joy. The kids ran up first, sticky hands, wide grins. They barreled into me like little freight trains, knocking flour dust off my apron. Jason followed, holding a pie from the store, a half-smile on his face. He hugged me quickly, murmured, "Smells amazing, Mom," then glanced at his phone. Melissa trailed behind, a bottle of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. She kissed my cheek, complimented the decor, then quickly began rearranging the food I'd set out, adding little touches here and there. "Just elevating it a little," she said. I let her. The afternoon was pleasant, familiar in all the right ways. The kids played with the cookie cutters. Jason refilled drinks. Melissa took 1,000 photos for her holiday highlights, and I watched it all from the kitchen doorway, soaking in the stillness before the plates hit the table. We sat down just before sunset. I led Grace. I always do. We passed the mashed potatoes, poured gravy into wide shallow boats, and clinked glasses filled with apple cider and wine. Jason cleared his throat partway through the meal, and tapped his fork against his glass. "I just want to say something," he said, rising slightly from his chair. I looked up from my plate, thinking maybe he was going to thank me. Or maybe mention Robert. He used to do that on holidays. A quiet nod to the man who raised him. But instead, Jason smiled in my direction and said, "So Mom, how's the extra money been helping you each month?" I froze. Not because I didn't understand the words, but because they didn't belong to any version of reality I recognized. I blinked at him. Melissa dropped her fork. Just a soft clink against her plate, but in the silence that followed, it was thunder. I swallowed hard. "Jason, what money?" His smile faltered. "The transfers. The monthly deposits I've been sending to help out. Melissa said you'd rather not talk about it, that you were embarrassed." He glanced at her. She was staring at her plate, her knuckles pale as she gripped her napkin in her lap. I felt something slip inside me, like a photograph falling out of a frame. That tiny moment of confusion, before dread settles in. I looked at Jason again. "I haven't received any money." He opened his mouth, closed it, pulled out his phone like he was trying to prove gravity still worked. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been sending $1,200 every month. For over a year. Melissa set it up so it wouldn't stress you out. She said she was managing everything. $1,200 every month, for over a year." I felt my breath catch in my throat. That's not pocket change. That's groceries, utilities, mortgage-level money. That's dental work I postponed. Prescriptions I spaced out. A new coat I told myself I didn't need. The room was still, except for the soft whir of the refrigerator, and the crackle of the candle wick beside the centerpiece. Melissa finally looked up, and her voice came out smaller than I've ever heard it. I thought she knew, and with those 5 words, the shape of everything around me changed. The turkey, the flowers, the laughter. It all dulled beneath the weight of something heavy, something undeniable. My hands went cold, and Jason just stared at her, phone still in hand, his face drained of color. What started as a warm holiday meal turned into the quiet collapse of a foundation I didn't realize was already cracking beneath me. And in that moment, I didn't know what hurt more, the lie itself, or the fact that I hadn't even seen it coming. No one spoke. The kind of silence that fills your ears with a high-pitched ring, like your body's trying to buffer reality. Melissa's face held a nervous kind of stillness, tight lips, wide eyes, hands frozen mid-motion above her lap. Jason stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. His brow furrowed, mouth slightly parted, phone still glowing in his hand. He looked at me again. "You never got anything?" I shook my head. And this time, I didn't try to smile it away. There was nothing polite left in me. No desire to protect anyone from discomfort. No, Jason. Not a single cent. He blinked and looked down, tapping through screens on his phone. His thumbs moved faster, more frantic, as if maybe the numbers would tell him something different this time. But they didn't. He turned the phone around and slid it toward me. Transaction history. Neatly spaced. Month after month. $1,200. Labeled, Mom Support Transfer. It felt surreal. Like I was watching someone else's life play out in my dining room. Jason's voice was lower now. Firmer. "Melissa?" She hesitated. Her eyes darted across the room, at the kids, at the pie, at the guests now staring silently at their plates, pretending to check their phones, unsure if they should stay or leave. It went to the joint account, she said, her voice barely audible. I thought she understood. My pulse quickened. What joint account? Her jaw tightened. Jason leaned forward. Wait, what account? Melissa swallowed hard. I opened a secondary checking account in her name, just to make things easier, to manage her bills. I thought. You did what? Jason cut in sharper now. I needed access to help her, she insisted. She said she didn't want to handle online payments, remember? She signed the forms. I shook my head. I signed medical papers. For insurance updates. You told me it was for my coverage. Her hands fidgeted now, wrapping and unwrapping her napkin. I used that form to create a joint account. I thought it was fine. The money was used. Used for what? Jason snapped. She hesitated. Groceries. Our mortgage. The kids' camp last summer. I didn't think it was a big deal. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Melissa looked at Jason with pleading eyes. We were behind on bills. You said your mom didn't want to feel like a burden. I was trying to make it easier for all of us. And I didn't lie, she technically had access. I never hid the account. Jason stared at her like something inside him was slowly coming unglued. You stole from my mother, he said slowly, deliberately. No, she shook her head. It wasn't theft. It was a redistribution. I used it for our family. For us. Jason stood up. And at that moment, two of the neighbors who had dropped by for dessert quietly excused themselves. Just a silent shuffle of coats and murmured apologies as they left behind half-full plates and untouched pie. The dining room shrank. Every breath felt louder. Every glance heavier. Jason stepped into the kitchen, rubbing his forehead. I stayed seated, my hands folded tightly in my lap, watching Melissa struggle to reassemble her expression, trying to shift from guilt to justification. I didn't think she'd notice, she muttered. She never asked about money. She said she was fine. I finally spoke. Calm. Controlled. I never asked because I trusted you. Melissa looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't have a response ready. Jason came back into the room, holding a printed document, one of my bank statements from months earlier. Why are these in your email? He asked her. Why are my mom's statements being sent to your inbox? Melissa didn't answer. She just sat there. Still. Like if she didn't move, maybe it would all pass. Jason looked at me, his expression full of disbelief and shame. Mom. I'm so sorry. I shook my head. You have nothing to apologize for. Melissa stood abruptly. You're making this bigger than it is. I didn't hurt anyone. Everything I did was to keep us afloat. Jason's voice didn't rise, but the quietness made it colder. You lied to both of us. You took money meant for my mother and spent it like it was yours. That's not support. That's deception. And finally Melissa's composure cracked. I didn't think you'd care. You were the one who always said she shouldn't live alone, that she needed help. I was doing everything to hold this family together. No, Jason said. You were doing everything to control it. And just like that, the last thread snapped. I got up and began clearing plates. Not because the meal was over, but because the illusion was. There's something haunting about betrayal when it doesn't come from enemies, but from people who sat beside you every Sunday. People who held your children. People who called you mom. It's not just the money. It's the slow erosion of trust. The realization that someone could stand in your kitchen, drink from your glasses and look you in the eye, while stealing your dignity one transaction at a time. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just kept stacking dishes one by one, as the life I thought I knew quietly crumbled beneath the weight of what had just been revealed. Melissa stood in the center of the room, arms crossed tight across her chest, the corners of her mouth twitching as if trying to hold in too many words at once. The silence around her begged for clarity, but all she gave us were fragments, pieces of an explanation that barely held together. It wasn't malicious, she finally said, her voice catching. I was just trying to help us stay afloat. We were drowning in debt. I thought it was temporary. Just until we caught up. Jason didn't speak. He stood against the doorway, arms limp by his sides, his eyes fixed on the floor like he was afraid of what might happen if he looked up. It wasn't anger that hung on his face. It was something deeper. Disappointment, maybe. Or disbelief. I watched them both. The couple I once thought of as a unit, now unraveling in real time in the same room where I used to read bedtime stories to their kids. My heart pounded, not from rage but from recognition. A moment I couldn't ignore pushed its way to the front of my mind. Melissa, a year and a half ago, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone wedged between her ear and shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom," she said casually. "These medical forms are just standard. I need your social security number to complete the insurance update. It's for your own file. You'll be fully covered, promise." She smiled at me as I wrote it down, handed it to her on a sticky note. I remember hesitating just a little. Something about giving out that number had always made me uncomfortable. But she looked so sure, so confident. I didn't want to cause friction. She tore the note up after typing, said she didn't like leaving paper trails. I remember laughing. Now I don't. Jason looked up, finally, and asked the question that sat between all of us like a storm waiting to land. "How long, Melissa?" She turned away from him, eyes scanning the windows, the cabinets, the crumbs on the table, everywhere but his face. "A little over a year," she whispered. "At first it was just the one transfer. Then the second. After that, it became easier to just keep it going. I handled all her online payments. It felt efficient. I told myself it was harmless." Jason's voice dropped to something low and cracked. "But it wasn't harmless. It was theft." Melissa spun around, her voice rising, hands thrown out in defense. "Do you think I wanted to do this? I was drowning. The credit cards, the mortgage, the medical bills after Liam's surgery. We were weeks from defaulting. You were working late every night and never looked at the statements. I didn't know what else to do." "You didn't ask," he snapped. "You didn't tell me. You just decided." The word decided hung there like an accusation. Because that's what it was. A choice. A decision made in a room I was never invited into. Jason turned to me slowly. "She used your information to open a joint account in your name," he said, "without your knowledge. That's fraud, Mom." I didn't flinch. But I felt the weight of it land inside me. I sat down, my hands resting in my lap, palms cold and open. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for too long. Was I so blind? Or just too trusting? I had welcomed her into my home. I had let her sort my bills, pick up my mail, manage my accounts, all under the belief that family meant protection, not exploitation. She had told me what I wanted to hear. That I didn't need to worry. That I could relax. And I, eager to believe I wasn't being left behind in a world of apps and updates, gave her the keys to my life without realizing the doors she was unlocking. Jason knelt beside me. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I reached over and touched his arm. "You didn't do this," I said. But deep inside, a small part of me wondered how long he had looked away. How many months he'd let the deposits go unquestioned. Not because he didn't care, but because Melissa had become the filter between us. And I had let her. Melissa stepped forward again, this time with tears in her eyes. Real ones. Or convincing, at least. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "You've always been good to me. I just didn't think it would unravel like this." He stared at her. Not with fury. Not even with resentment. But with something colder. Clarity. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always come from a villain. Sometimes it comes from the very people who smile at your table and call you family. People who slowly chip away at your trust with quiet hands and pleasant words, until there's nothing left to hold on to. And in that moment, sitting in my own living room, I realized something I never expected to admit. I had no idea who Melissa really was. And maybe I never did. The morning after Thanksgiving felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather, but because the house felt emptied. Even while still full of furniture. I couldn't sleep, my body ached, but not from age. From disappointment, from truth cutting deeper than I thought it could. Jason came by just after 9 a.m. He didn't knock, he walked in, holding a small stack of folders in one hand and his phone in the other. His face was pale, the color drained from his usual warmth. I knew something more had come to light. "I logged into Mom's insurance portal," he said quietly. His voice had lost its edge. It wasn't anger anymore. It was grief. He laid the papers on the table and started turning them one by one. There were reimbursement claims, nearly $3,400, filed over the past 14 months. All approved. All paid. He looked at me. They were for you. I blinked, confused. Reimbursements? For what? Copays. Medication. Specialist visits. Dental coverage. All filed under your name. But you never saw the money. And from what I've seen, you never even used those services. I stared at the forms like they were written in another language. But then something surfaced. I remembered the tooth. That molar that had cracked last winter, the one that made it painful to chew. I had asked Melissa if insurance would cover it. She had sighed, stared at her phone and said, "It's out of network. You'd have to pay out of pocket. It's probably not worth it for just one tooth." So I let it go. I stopped eating anything too hard. Switched to soup. Told myself it wasn't urgent. And here it was, approved, filed, reimbursed. In full. I pressed my hand to my chest. Not for dramatic effect. My heart had actually stuttered. "She saw me as disposable," I whispered. "Just an old woman with fading memory. Someone to siphon from while smiling over coffee and calling me mom." Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to. He walked into the guest room and began gathering clothes into one of the kids' backpacks. I heard zippers, drawers opening, a tiny voice asking, "Daddy, where are we going?" And Jason, his voice soft but final, "Grandma's house, just for a little while." Melissa arrived 30 minutes later. Her eyes were red, her clothes wrinkled like she hadn't slept. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jason held up his hand. "I'm done talking," he said. She stepped forward, pleading. "You don't understand." "I do," he interrupted. "I understand perfectly now." He turned back to me. "I'll be staying with Mom for a while. The kids too." Melissa's eyes widened. "You're taking them from me?" Jason didn't raise his voice. "I'm protecting them from a woman who lied to my face and stole from the one person who's always loved us unconditionally." She reached out, but he stepped away. "I need space," he said. "And so does Mom. Don't come by." He walked out, one child in each hand. They didn't cry. But she did. I stood there, still, watching her fall apart in the home where she had unraveled me piece by piece, pretending to hold everything together. She turned to me, desperation in her voice. "Please, say something. I never meant to hurt you." I met her eyes. "I didn't raise you," I said. "But I welcomed you. I trusted you. And you took that trust and used it like currency." She stepped back like the words stung more than she expected. "You pretended to care while treating me like a problem to manage. But I am not a burden. And I am not broken." The door shut behind her with a sound that didn't echo, but ended something. That day, my house felt emptier than ever. But it also felt clearer. No more pretending. No more silence. Just the truth, and the cost it demanded. I never knew silence could feel so heavy. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost. The walls echoed everything I didn't say. I'd stand in the kitchen, staring at the kettle as it boiled, forgetting why I turned it on in the first place. Sleep didn't come. Food had no taste. Even the clock ticking on the wall sounded louder than my own breathing. Every time I looked at the chair by the window, his chair, I imagined what my husband would say. He was the steady one. The kind of man who didn't need many words to see through people. He never fully trusted Melissa. He never said it out loud, but I could see it in the way his eyes narrowed whenever she brushed off my concerns. If only he were here. I pulled out his old flannel shirt from the drawer, and held it to my chest like it could still beat with his warmth. I whispered to the air, "You'd be proud of Jason." He finally saw through it. One evening, Jason came by after work. He looked tired, worn thin. But he carried 2 grocery bags, and in his eyes, I saw something else, guilt. He placed the bags on the counter carefully, like the act of doing something helpful might patch up the cracks. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm so sorry." He didn't need to explain. But he did. I should have checked. I should have asked you directly. I let her handle too much. Because it was easier. And I didn't want to believe she could. His voice trailed off. He set down a box of cereal and looked away. I reached out, touched his arm. "You believed in your wife. That's not a fault," I said. "But now that you know, you're doing what's right. That's what matters." He looked at me then. Really looked. I want you to move in with us. You shouldn't be alone right now. I smiled gently. That's kind of you. But I need time. Space. I need to think clearly without being someone's guest. And besides, I pulled a leather-bound notebook from under the table. I've started writing everything down. He furrowed his brows. Like journaling? More than that, I said. It's a record of what happened, what was said, what I missed, what I need to remember, in case my memory ever tries to be kind and forget. Jason nodded slowly. You always did like putting things on paper. I didn't tell him the full truth. That this wasn't just for me. That a storm had stirred inside me, quiet and slow. And I needed to see the whole picture. Piece by piece. He hugged me tightly before he left. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I cried. Not loud. Just a few tears pressed against the collar of his coat. Silent grief. For the daughter-in-law I once believed in. For the version of life I thought I had. For the woman I had been. Too trusting, too quiet, too eager to keep peace even at the cost of my own dignity. When he left, I sat down and opened the notebook again. At the top of the next page I wrote. If someone had told me trust could be weaponized, I might have laughed. But now I know better. The pen moved steadily, line after line. And somewhere between ink and memory, I began reclaiming myself. The first morning I felt strong enough to shower. I put on my favorite navy coat. The one with deep inside pockets. I didn't tell Jason where I was going. I told no one. The office was quiet, the waiting room lined with law books and the faint scent of lemon disinfectant. When the lawyer, an older woman named Helen with sharp eyes and steady hands, asked me why I was there, I simply handed her my notebook. She read, page by page. Occasionally she underlined a sentence, or nodded slowly. When she finished, she placed it down and folded her hands. What your daughter-in-law did, she said, isn't just unethical, it's criminal. She asked for documents, bank statements, my insurance correspondence, anything I could find. I brought it all the next week, stuffed into envelopes and folders. She examined each one with clinical precision. Then she stopped. This, she said, pointing to a signature on a form filed months ago. This isn't your handwriting, is it? I shook my head. I didn't even recognize the address listed. Melissa had rerouted mail, opened accounts, filed claims, all without ever needing my voice, just my name. Helen began compiling a file, a thick, undeniable file, something weighty and solid enough to withstand scrutiny. We made copies, time-stamped, labeled, and I said nothing to Jason, nothing to the neighbors. I let silence be my ally. Melissa came by 2 weeks later. She brought peonies in a vase and a sheepish smile. Said she'd been doing some soul-searching and wanted to apologize. I invited her in, offered tea, sat across from her like two women in a game of chess, only she didn't know she'd already lost. She cried, of course, said she was overwhelmed, said she didn't think I'd notice, said she felt pressured to keep up with appearances, because Jason expected a lifestyle. I nodded, poured her more tea, offered tissues, but I never told her my phone sat in my pocket, quietly recording everything. The admissions, the subtle justifications. The moment she sighed and muttered, I never meant for it to go that far. I just needed a little help. She looked at me then, hopeful, as if I might reach out and tell her it was all forgiven. But I simply said, I appreciate your honesty. When she left, I locked the door behind her. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not out of joy, but because I knew what came next. A storm was forming, but it wouldn't scream. It would unfold in documents, in deadlines, in dates Melissa wouldn't see coming. I returned to Helen's office the next morning. I placed my phone on her desk and played the recording. No outbursts, no drama, just a calm voice admitting everything. Helen leaned back in her chair. We're ready, she said. And so was I. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I rang the doorbell. Melissa opened the door, surprised to see me standing there with a manila envelope in hand. She didn't speak at first, just blinked, then forced a smile. I wasn't expecting company, she said, brushing her hair behind her ear like old habits die sweet. I won't be long, I replied. And I wasn't. I handed her the envelope. No eye contact, no warmth. Just precision. What's this? She asked, her voice cracking just slightly. Read it, I said. Then I turned and walked back to my car without another word. By the time I reached home, she had called 6 times. Left 4 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. But I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The cease and desist letter spoke clearly enough. It outlined the forged documents, the misused funds, the joint account created in my name without consent. It ended with a clear demand. Immediate closure of all accounts tied to my identity. Full repayment within a set timeline. Zero tolerance for further contact unless through legal counsel. Jason came by 3 days later, eyes tired, lips pressed into a grim line. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I paused, the air thick between us. Because you needed to see her for who she is on your own, I answered. He sat on my porch steps like he did when he was 10, trying to figure out how the world works. Except now the innocence was gone. He ran a hand over his face. She said you were exaggerating. I didn't believe her. Then I saw the court papers. He looked up. You're taking her to court? No, I said softly. The state is. Because Helen had done more than file demands, she'd reported the financial abuse. Elder fraud, they called it. A term that made me feel both ancient and vindicated. Melissa tried everything. She sent letters, some typed, some scrawled in her rushed cursive. One came with an old photo of my wedding day tucked inside. Guilt is a desperate language. But I didn't reply. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted correction. I wanted my name back, my dignity restored. I wanted boundaries written in permanent ink. At the hearing, she looked smaller than I remembered, hair pulled back, hands wringing her scarf like it held the answers she never found. Jason sat beside me, stiff and silent. He didn't look at her once. The judge read the findings aloud. Fraudulent signatures, unauthorized account activity, insurance violations. Melissa didn't speak. Her lawyer did most of the talking, offering a repayment plan, promising compliance, pleading for leniency. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood. I'm not here to ruin anyone's life, I said. I'm here because someone tried to erase mine while smiling across my dinner table. Silence followed. Not a gasp. Not a word. Just a truth heavy enough to echo. The judge ruled in my favor. Repayment, formal apology, and a permanent bar from handling any legal or financial matters in my name. As we walked out of the courthouse, Jason reached for my hand. I let him hold it for a while, because sometimes healing means standing apart before you stand together again. And sometimes the strongest revenge is showing the person who underestimated you just how deeply you remember. The courtroom emptied slowly, but I didn't rush. I remained seated for a moment, breathing it in. Not just the air, but the justice. It didn't roar. It didn't thunder. It whispered finally. The gavel had fallen in my favor. Melissa was fined heavily, publicly reprimanded for financial abuse of an elder. Her reputation, a carefully curated illusion of perfection, shattered under oath. There was no more hiding behind birthday cakes and matching Christmas pajamas. She had crossed a line, and this time there was no charm left to erase the footprints. Jason stood beside me as the judge delivered the final blow. Full custody granted to him. Not just for what Melissa had done to me, but for what she'd tried to hide in their own home. There had been more lies. Small ones that multiplied in the shadows. Unpaid school fees while she posted spa trips. Mysterious emergencies that emptied their joint account. Gaslighting him over missed messages from teachers and doctors. Even deleting his mother's voicemails so he'd think I'd stopped calling. The threads unraveled quickly once pulled. And Jason, once blind with loyalty, now saw with painful clarity. I looked over at Melissa as she stood outside the courthouse, head down, sunglasses hiding what tears she could still afford. She wasn't escorted in cuffs. There were no sirens. Just consequences, cold and quiet. I didn't need to yell. I didn't storm her house. I didn't shame her at Sunday service. I wrote. I recorded. I remembered. And in the end, I let the truth walk in and speak louder than anything I could have screamed. The grandchildren stayed with Jason that night. He made spaghetti from a box. The twins set the table without being asked. When I stopped by with garlic bread and homemade sauce, The youngest ran to hug me so fast, her sock slipped off her foot. Jason watched from the kitchen, his voice rough when he said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I didn't respond. I just handed him the bread and nodded. Later that night, as I sat in my favorite chair with my journal open on my lap, I scribbled a single line. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I just stood up. That had been enough. I didn't need applause. I didn't need anyone to pick sides. The victory wasn't in the judgment, it was in my backbone. And as I turned off the lamp beside me, the silence didn't feel lonely. I need you to breathe. I wasn't ready for that twist either. If your heart just dropped, tap the like button. It tells me I'm not the only one who felt it. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who loves real-life drama as much as you do. My new apartment wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Light spilled across the wooden floors every morning, and peace hung in the air like the scent of fresh coffee. Jason had insisted on furnishing it himself. The couch was too soft, the throw pillows too many, but every piece came with love stitched into it. There was a photograph on my side table. My late husband, smiling beside a much younger me. I used to wonder what he'd say if he saw the storm that unfolded after he was gone. Now I think he'd be proud. Not because I fought, but because I didn't fold. Life didn't just continue. It deepened. I reconnected with women I hadn't spoken to in years. We met for tea, took slow walks around the lake, laughed at stories we once cried over. I joined a community center near the park. Taught knitting to girls who reminded me of my granddaughters. Restless fingers, restless hearts. And I volunteered at the senior library, guiding trembling hands to the right shelves. Those hours, quiet and filled with purpose, became the balm I didn't know I needed. Melissa never reached out again. No letters, just silence. And that silence became my favorite song. By fall, the trees outside my window flamed orange and gold. Another year had turned, and with it came the first Thanksgiving I wasn't dreading. Jason hosted. He cooked, burned half the sweet potatoes, and ordered backup turkey just in case. The twins made name cards out of glitter and glue. One read Grandma Queen in shaky, sparkly letters. I arrived in a cranberry-colored sweater and found my seat. At the head of the table. Not tucked in the corner. Not placed near the kitchen for convenience. No, I was front and center. Jason raised his glass as the kids settled. "Thanks, Mom," he said, voice cracking just a bit, "for showing me what strength really looks like." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The warmth in my chest said everything. I had lost things. Time. Money. Trust. But I'd gained something richer. Self-respect. A tighter bond with my son. And the quiet kind of power no one can ever steal again. And that was how I took back my power without raising my voice. If this ending gave you chills or left you speechless, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because my next story might just be even wilder. And please drop a comment below. I read every single one.